Okay, maybe we should start. I'm really excited and happy to be hosting this public lecture as part of the AA Public Program. My name is Platon Isaias. I'm directing the MPhil in Projective Cities, an MPhil in Urban Design and Architecture. And this is the second last public lecture that we organized this academic year. And as I said, we're incredibly happy to have with us Edit Collective. It's the second time that we have the team with us. Well, I think the first lecture was like a year and a half ago or something, right? Yeah. When we could still go and have a beer after the presentation. Now we have to fortunately skip that part of the AA rituals, so there's no AA bar for us this evening. I'm not going to say much. I'll just give a very brief introduction about you and your work, and I'll just give the floor to you. So it is a group working collectively to challenge the enduring biases and hierarchies embedded in the built environment. The Feminist Design Collective believes in full social, economic, and political equality for all and uses design as a tool to support more egalitarian interactions, both during the design process and as an outcome of the finished project. In 2020, Edit was commissioned to design How We Live Now for the Barbican Centre. The exhibition showcases the work of Matrix Feminist Design Cooperative. It is due to open in a few days, right? The 17th of May, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Edit's proposal aims to address how an archive of feminist architectural artifacts can be displayed and disseminated in a feminist way, both through the design of the exhibition infrastructure as well as the graphic material. Also, this year, Edit was selected by the Future Architecture Platform for the call for ideas with the project Honey, I'm Home. This ongoing research project focusing on domestic design explores how the layouts and contents of our homes have the power to influence and maintain established gender and family roles. As part of the same research project, Edit exhibited a fictional prototype for collectivizing domestic labor at the Oslo Architecture Triennale in 2019. As an alternative to the capitalist assumption that housework is most efficient when performed individually, the project Gross Domestic Product is a device that can be used only by 3 people. So welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to have with us Alberta, Alice, Hannah, Mariana, Svetlana, Sage, Sophie from Edit. So the digital floor is yours, and we're really looking forward to the conversation.
So first of all, thank you very much, Platon, for inviting us. We are super grateful to have the chance to share our work with you today. So as Platon said, we are Edit, we're a feminist collective based in London. And most of us met actually at university, where we shared common interests, and this led us to us forming the collective a couple of years ago in 2018. Today, and we would like to introduce you to some of our projects and the values that we share when working together.
Sorry, one second. So we've been asked in the past why we describe ourselves as a feminist design collective. By this, we don't mean that we just happen to be a collective of feminists, which as individuals we are. This description refers to the way we practice. As a feminist design collective, the approach we take to any project uses design as a tool to support more equal interactions, both during the design process and as an outcome of the finished project.
We follow the same ethos when working within Edit. We want Edit to be managed in the most egalitarian way possible, where no voice is less important than another. Our decisions are taken completely collectively, and our work is critiqued by all members, and no one holds ownership or authorship of any work individually. And collaborating collectively in this way has actually required us to do some really hard work around unlearning the individualized habits of ownership and authorship, which mainstream architectural education and practice quite often strongly embed.
As a practice, we want to implement more equal interactions when collaborating externally as well as internally. So whether this is with clients, users, or other designers. Our ambition is to bring a feminist lens to the final output, but also to the process of the project. So we aim to make our work super accessible so it can be enjoyed by a wide audience from varied backgrounds. We found that using methods which move away from traditional architecture and its conventional outputs opens up the conversation in a more inclusive way. So this may be done through techniques of storytelling, fictional narratives, photo montage, or GIFs, as well as working with objects and scales which most people can easily relate to.
Well, now one of our main goals is actually to introduce a process of unlearning of some very deeply ingrained and serious issues through the playful and engaging interactions, which also fundamentally disestablish architects and designers as experts and prompt the viewers and users of our project to imagine other ways of living. This was the case for our first project, which we developed together, which is called Act 1 Honey Hum Home, where we looked at a space that everyone is familiar with, the home, and also the objects that inhabits it, that everyone recognizes, to express our research in an accessible and fun way.
Honey Hum Home is one of our ongoing research projects, which has kind of been slowly growing over time, and with new edit members joining and kind of bringing in new strands of research with it. But the starting point of the project understands our kind of spatial interactions with multiple scales. So from the urban scale to domestic scale to a room or an object, as a series of performances in order to define these physical spaces as theatrical sets, which have been written and designed under systems of patriarchy and capitalism. By choosing to look at architecture as a series of socially and politically constructed sets, it becomes a lot easier for us to kind of propose tweaks and talk about meddling with them. The research currently focuses mainly on the UK, but branches out across other Western cultures which have shared similar trajectories, whether because of British influence through colonization or because the way that American media disseminates Western-centric ideas so incredibly powerfully.
The research started by interrogating the floor plans of Victorian houses. We argue that the floor plan of a typical Victorian house can be read as a diagram of familiar and gendered power relations through the simple demarcation of space. The diagram begins with a clear division between the two halves of the ground floor, the public and private spaces. So for example, kitchens were historically the domain of either servants or women and were often placed far away from the more public-facing dining room. This spatialized diagram of power structures has been naturalized to the point that it is rarely interrogated properly, and it is often duplicated without concern for its contribution to the current housing and social crisis.
Our starting point for Honey I'm Home was to remake a particularly powerful and problematic illustration called Playboy's Progress, as you can see here, which was published in Playboy magazine in 1954. The drawing suggests how the architecture of the bachelor pad and the performativity of the characters influences and aids what is less than consensual seduction, where the man whose apartment they are in holds all of the power. Our version of this is called Still No Progress.
Still No Progress illustrates an archetypal British domestic environment of a Victorian terraced house and is accompanied by a script which plays out an interaction between a heterosexual man and woman who have just met. The scene we've written describes what happens at the end of their first date when the man offers to walk the woman home, but he doesn't just leave her at the door. The drawing and script attempt to convey how the man uses the predictability and essentially patriarchal basis of the terraced house design to assert his power in this woman's home, where the product again is a coercive sexual interaction of obligation, not consent. Although Playboy's Progress and Still No Progress are both set in different domestic typologies, this piece of work aims to highlight how the patriarchal systems these housing designs are born of allow society to operate which is oppressive and violent towards women.
With Honey, I'm Home, our aim was to then question the architectural qualities of domestic spaces through the critique of their foundations, which is the nuclear family. In today's context, to inhabit a family home results in the acceptance of conforming to both the conditions of being a family and the constitution of a financial unit, complicitly performing within the orders of private property. So the family is a reproductive force of capitalist relations, maintaining the dominance of masculinity, the naturalization of housework, and conditioning children for a competitive labor market.
The specific arrangement of furniture can actually dictate the rituals and kind of routines which reinforce what is the icon of the nuclear family. And whether it's the arrangement of the table with the father at the head of it and the mother serving dinner to the children that are waiting to be served, or even the location of the double bed, which is at the center of the bedroom and is conceived for two people and representative of conjugal life. We think that one could say that the rooms within the home have become over time a series of theatrical sets for actually gendered performances. And the repetition of mundane and stylized performative acts actually fits into social constructs of gender difference. We find this as a useful starting point when thinking about changing habits and rituals. As Judith Butler argues, that gender is performed rather than a series of innate male or female traits.
These rituals are only possible if isolating one set from another, and if the division between them is reinforced. This happens with an architecture of boundaries, walls, corridors, and closed doors, but also through the naming of different rooms according to the rituals and objects which are meant to inhabit them. In our projects, we like to use a mix of architectural drawings and popular culture images to make the research accessible to all. We think it's important that research and tools of design are shared, as we think that these projects become more powerful when reaching audiences in and outside of academia, as well as in and outside of the architectural industry.
Performativity is very present in our work as a topic of research, but also as a process through which we explore the different topics. So we feel that design has become so powerfully normalized that our actions within the spaces have become prescribed performances. This is further ingrained into society through popular media, showing most spaces as well as the roles and relationships between people as unquestioned standards. So we think it's useful to use performance as a tool to respond and highlight this and invite people to imagine alternative modes of living.
A few of our other realised and unrealised projects stemmed out of Honey, I'm Home. For example, in this image, which was part of our unsuccessful submission for the exhibition Power at RIBA, we took these concepts and proposed an exhibition based on displaying the home as a theatrical set, where the corridor disappears and conventional layouts and objects within each room are disrupted. By omitting the corridor and creating an enfilade of rooms, we wanted to disrupt the typical home layout and comment on the role of the corridor as a design tool for separating different rituals and performances within the home, and as well as being a particularly discriminatory spatial device, which was conceived to separate servants from those they were serving.
So then at a smaller scale, again, than a set of rooms, Honey, I'm Home then took the shape of a Hoover for our submission to the 2019 Oslo Architecture Triennale. We decided to focus on housework to showcase and edit an object linked to a very specific and relatable domestic performance. The Triennale, titled Enough, the Architecture of Degrowth, invited us to rethink and resist our current cultural obsession with economic growth, which has, of course, landed us in this time of climate emergency, social division, and general chaos. As one of our most naturalized models of living together, we felt that the nuclear family and its kind of architectural home act as a really good starting point when daydreaming about things like degrowth.
So for our project in the Oslo Triennale, we made some really simple alterations to a very recognizable appliance. to challenge current divisions of housework established by the nuclear family. The gross domestic product is a hoover that can only be operated when used by 3 people simultaneously. By altering the hoover's design to make its individual use almost impossible, we wanted to challenge current notions of domestic labor and to explore its potential to be a collective, sociable, and political act.
So the GDP, or gross domestic product, is an example of one scale that could be altered in order to start changing a culture around sharing and reproductive labor. In a world where time is money, saying no to productivity as the most important measure becomes an act of resistance. So as an alternative to the capitalist assumption that housework is most efficient when performed individually, the GDP can only be used with at least 3 people. And in order to make the GDP, we broke apart several used vacuum cleaners, rewired them and repainted them, testing out many different colors along the way, as you can see.
In order to imagine how these small changes might affect larger change, we set the hoover within a fictional narrative, claiming that it was an idea founded in 1919, which was actually the time when the original domestic hoover took its current form. We use this fictional narrative to provoke people to imagine how differently we could be living had we followed an alternative trajectory. The GDP was displayed with a cleaning sign, which on one side had graphic instructions for how to turn on the appliance and start hoovering the museum it was exhibited in. And on the other side was a brief explanation of the invented history of the object, which said,
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. So Sage is going to read out the fictional narrative that we wrote. Go for it.
So this prototype, hang on, this prototype vacuum cleaner. Yeah, I can't, it keeps flipping.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'll read out the fictional narrative we wrote in case you can't read it from that teeny tiny picture. So this prototype vacuum cleaner is based on an unrealized 1919 design by the forgotten inventor Jenny Spangler. Spangler was the daughter of James Murray Spangler, whose work as a janitor and struggle with asthma led him to invent the first personal suction cleaning device in 1908. Inspired by trips to the laundry with her grandmother, where domestic labour was collective and sociable, Spangler's new device was, unlike her father's, designed to be used by 3 people acting together. 100 years later, the gross domestic product brings Jenny Spangler's long-lost collective cleaning device to life. Those characters we talked about in that were actually real, and people that the James Murray guy did invent it, and his daughter did work with him, but she didn't actually invent a 3-person hoover. But we found that creating a narrative around the conception of the GDP was a good way of undermining people's assumptions of the spaces and objects we live amongst. We also found it a good way to keep a project which questions some quite serious issues engaging, playful and immersive. And one pretty entertaining result of this approach was that one journalist published an article online which referred to our fictional narrative as if it were the real history of the object. And we find it really interesting to create these moments where fiction is so plausible, it feels uncanny.
It's also important for us to not position any of these projects in a way that poses it as a solution for a better way of living, but more to invite people to challenge the way that they're living now and open up some questions, such as why something has been designed the way it is, who has designed it, and who have they designed it to be used by? And could it have been designed differently? And if so, how would this impact us in a wider way? So by tweaking kind of certain objects and spaces, we can start to pick away at certain norms which we take for granted and maybe ought to be changed or maybe rewritten entirely.
We think that the question that Alberto just kind of said are not really asked often enough. And whether this is an advertisement or a film, a TV show, spaces that surround us are often portrayed in the same way. And the roles of people inhabiting these spaces are very homogeneous. And this is why, and what we wanted to point out and criticize when inviting people to spot our edits. So we took very recognizable images and scenes and we slightly tweaked them, changing the props of domestic performance, so all the kind of objects and rituals in different ways. And we came up with several methods of disruption, which, for example, is one is altering the scale of the object, altering the position in the space or in the home. Is the repetition of objects as well, or the change of user or number of users, like, for example, the GDP. The change of materiality even of objects, and the changing of a room from public to private or vice versa.
This process often started with us contemplating together what would happen if. Most of the time it felt a bit more like a game with some quite fun outcomes. And we feel that by approaching this process playfully, we end up considering some quite radical and often impractical ways of disrupting our domestic routines. By creating scenarios which may be impractical or supposedly unproductive, we also wanted to question what society under capitalism values most today, why productivity, efficiency, and time are more important than care and collective actions.
So at the furniture scale, for example, we applied a similar thinking when imagining a new type of dining table, where everyone might eat together on a giant plate, or even drink together with a long garden of glasses and have to drink it in a very synchronized way. So this would result in loads of options of food and drinks that would be shared equally by everyone. And it would also have an impact on the washing up task, which would need to become a sociable and collective activity.
At the scale of the room instead, this is another example that we produce as a very rough collage, imagining what it would be like if the living room itself was where people would bathe too. And we kind of did that to question the assumptions around privacy and cleanness. And this is, of course, similar of how people lived historically in this country. And we asked ourselves if we can learn something from these historical habits.
And then at the building scale, this is a collage we made which imagines how life might be lived differently if we shared our utilities, such as water or electricity. How might this change the way we do domestic labour? Would it become a more collective activity? And then in turn, how could this alter our attitude towards cleaning? Would it start to be less of a chore and more seen as a fun sociable act?
Another example of a spot the edit is one we made for an exhibition at San Mir Gallery. And it's a double-ended spoon, which is whittled out of sycamore, which was foraged in Poplar over lockdown 1. Spoon Me is a meditation on the doting activity of feeding. The double-ended utensil disrupts the idea of care as being a one-sided relationship, posing questions about power structures and care in the home. A symmetrical eating device can be seen as a sort of manifesto for interdependence and equality in our most intimate settings and pursuits.
Last year, we were also asked by Open City to develop a concept for children's activity during lockdown. So we approached that task thinking that maybe this could be a way for us to share this process with others, in the hope that it would be kind of a powerful and fun way to do this at-home activity. So we wrote and designed an activity called Home Revolution, which was aimed at children to have some fun at home, whilst also utilizing a child's naturally more playful and open-minded perspective towards imagining other worlds. Whether it was doing a collage, by building things together, or by using furniture in alternative ways, whoever took part in the activity inadvertently took a step towards dismantling outdated spatial standards.
A really important and challenging process that we try to apply to our work is the one of unlearning. And by unlearning, we don't mean the process of losing knowledge or becoming more ignorant, but the process of questioning how we behave in space and trying to forget all of the assumptions that we make when designing for different users and about the needs of different users. And this is something that we invite our audience to do through our work, but also a challenging brief that we set to ourselves.
And learning is something that we need to do through the topics of our projects, but as well also need to do in the ways in which we organise ourselves. So we've all worked in traditional architectural practices where hierarchy and efficiency are really the key motors to all those organisations. But within EDIT, we try to force ourselves to unlearn these ways of working and instead promote egalitarian and democratic interactions. Whilst working in practice, though, however, we've also witnessed the racial and gender biases that are still sadly very much present in many places.
So another project that we've been working on is called A Woman of Colour Enters the Workplace. This is a body of work that explains through a diagram and architectural drawings so far the experiences of a woman of colour within the architectural office. The diagram critiques how diversity of leadership influences the experience of a woman of colour within the workplace via two differing scenarios and two opposing leadership demographics. So often we work within institutions, especially in the architectural profession, where positions of power are held predominantly by white males. The policies and structures in place within these workplaces are made by them and therefore made to support them. Consequently, when the opposite, i.e. a woman of colour, enters the workplace, it can present as a challenging environment for her to navigate. This work is inspired and responds to the Chronicle of the Problem of Women of Colour in a Non-Profit by Safe House Progressive Alliance for Non-Violence. And so, with this body of work came this architectural drawing and script titled Act 3, A Woman of Colour Enters the Workplace, Scene 1, Overheard in the Office / Oppression. This is a fictional narrative based on true accounts from numerous peers of colour, highlighting the experiences of women of colour within the architectural office. The piece makes clear the very much still present racial biases and injustices within the profession via a reality-based fiction to point and allow the reader to identify with the experience of the protagonist of the scene. This text is included in Now You Know, a publication that brings together a collection of 50 reflections from architects and urbanists of colour, addressing spatial inequality and discrimination in the built environment industry. From MBEs to architecture students, artists, policy makers, each contributor accompanies their poem, essay, or interview with a concise tip and a tune. The Sound Advice DNA. Our advice that accompanied the work was, it's not my job to educate you, it's yours.
The power relationships and infrastructure at home and, in fact, in the workplace is also directly related to the hierarchy and infrastructure in the city. Who is able to be outside the home and move freely in the urban realm is another question that we try to ask in our research. The intersectional themes of gender, race, disability, and identity were explored in the article titled Just Toilets, which was published in BAM Edition Journal. The subject of public toilets is a useful lens because through it we can look at issues around access and inclusion. And throughout history, and even up until this day, various marginalized groups were denied access to public conveniences on the basis of their gender, race, or disability. Even though the size and design of toilets have been regulated and standardized for quite some time, the never-ending queues to ladies' rooms and the plight of transgender people today show that truly fair and just laws have not yet been achieved. We are passionate about forging allyship between various marginalized groups and spreading awareness around social justice through our writing and campaigning. We see research and writing as a parallel form of practice for EDIT, and we hope to be able to reach wide audiences by using these different mediums and methods.
Members of EDIT have previously researched on the role of cultural institutions within the city and their potential for becoming public spaces of positive influence. So when we were really happy when we were asked by the Barbican to design and build the exhibition How We Live Now, which is due to open, like Platon said, in a few days on the 17th of May, a few weeks. And so the exhibition displays the work of Matrix Feminist Design Cooperative. Matrix was active in the 80s and the 90s. Their work addressed the ways in which the design of the built environment excludes particular groups, specifically in relation to gender, race, and disability. We were lucky to work alongside curators John Asbury from the Barbican and Joss Boyce from Matrix to develop the concept of the exhibition. The installation we designed explores two important social questions. Who are our buildings and shared spaces for, and how do they affect us?
So the brief was to create something different to a conventional architecture exhibition, which often focus on a few final refined pieces held up as these precious artefacts. And it was important to everyone that the behind the scenes process work, ranging from construction details to emails, was treated as equally important, if not more, as the final drawings, photos, and models. Often our buildings and spaces are thought to be something that is designed by a lone genius, often male figure, perhaps extending to the names partners of a firm.
But to contrast that, we were keen to work in a non-hierarchical way and involve others to generate an exciting collaboration between different disciplines. So we brought together some incredible designers and fabricators to help us realize the project. This also echoes Matrix's approach, who were particularly radical in their time due to their interdisciplinary and intersectional approach. So the timber and the metalwork was fabricated by Eloise Farley from Ladywood. She's a brilliant fabricator and artist based in Margate, who we also worked with to build the exhibition structure. And working on site was really like a pleasure, a really pleasant experience where we all helped each other and shared knowledge in a really good way. The textiles were designed and made by artist gardener Rachel Jones-Jones and fashion designer Hannah Coley. Their beautiful driving concept was to naturally dye the textiles using a site-specific palette based on plants which can be found in the area around the Barbican.
The proposals' overarching objectives are actually accessibility and flexibility. These were the initial diagrams in our competition entry where we proposed how the space would be divided into smaller or bigger rooms depending to the changing needs and programs in the exhibition. We wanted the space, its content, and its conversations to feel open to anyone. And we also wanted visitors with different needs to feel comfortable in the space. So whether they have come for a solitary, intimate experience or to socialize with a large group. We also wanted the space to feel like more of like an urban room, a space that can make people feel able to properly occupy it, appropriate it, and kind of spend more time there. And I guess the bigger challenge that we had was to create this kind of intimate space within the vast open space of the Barbican foyer. However, we feel we designed the exhibition to be coherent with this context, because the ground floor of the Barbican is an important civic space and is used in different ways by people as study room, as a place to go out to read, as a waiting lobby for the pre-pandemic many events that happened in the center, but also as a bar. And I mean, we wanted the exhibition to feel as unpretentious and approachable and to complement rather than detach itself from the atmosphere of the ground floor of the Barbican.
We approached this by taking inspiration from how often political and community groups, such as Matrix, as well as ourselves a little bit, often informally appropriate domestic space, whether for meeting in someone's living room or to gather around a kitchen table. And then we tried to reverse this relationship by creating something that feels domestic, but within a larger institutional context. So we ended up designing a space which kind of references domesticity, but also subtly undermining it. And we did this in 3 key moves. First of all, scale. We started by enclosing a small space within the larger kind of cavernous Barbican lobby, and then smaller spaces inside that again. This created a more intimate and comfortable space made up of domestically proportioned nooks and little rooms.
Secondly, the walls. Matrix sought to make architecture accessible to those without a formal architectural education. For example, a whole chapter of their book, Making Space, is dedicated to how to read plans. So we wanted to be very honest in the construction of the exhibition and created walls to house and exhibit the work made out of timber stud work. This is a reference to the construction technique typically used to create internal partitions in houses. And we also wanted to reveal what happens if you take off the plasterboard and look inside. These structures are then punctured by openings mimicking doors and windows. Then finally, in one continuous loop, there's a metal curtain rail, which weaves in and out of the walls, much like pipes might, with a curtain wrapping and enclosing individual spaces. The curtain instantly brings connotations of domesticity and privacy, but is also key in allowing the audience to interact with the design of the space. By moving the curtain around, you can open up or enclose spaces to create different levels of intimacy. Books and drawings can be revealed by drawing the curtain back and having a closer look. In its open configuration, the main larger space is intended to be the social center of the exhibition. The curtains are drawn back to allow entry and visibility into the space, but the curtains can then again be wrapped around the room to host more intimate meetings or talks.
So we were also commissioned to develop a graphic identity for the exhibition, which is used throughout the exhibition as well as in an at-home pack. This at-home pack forms an alternative form of exhibition catalog. So rather than focusing on Matrix alone, the pack showcases the work of different contemporary organizations. The work of these collectives highlight voices that are often marginalized in architecture and design. And the pack also includes reinterpreted materials from the Matrix archive. The exhibition catalog, which is called Revealing Objects, was conceptualized as an alternative mode of dissemination of the archive presented in the exhibition. It was designed as a series of objects which vary in size and content, but all follow a similar graphic identity. For the pack, as well as the exhibition space, we designed a new typeface. It's influenced by the motion studies and domestic engineers of the early 20th century, and is also inspired by the Barbican's current typeface, which is Futura. We tested the use of different tools and domestic objects to develop this textured typeface, which is quite soft and informal. Inspired by the concept behind it, we decided to call it domestic. In the at-home pack, we wanted to give the user a sense of discovery, curiosity, and playfulness. So we designed red and blue acetate lenses, which allow the reader to reveal and hide different parts of the text or drawings, which may appear hidden at first sight. And then the reader can use these lenses to uncover different layers. Inspired by the stickers found on lampposts and street signage, we also designed a sticker which contains a QR code. The code links to the online archive of Matrix's work and adds a new method for the research to be disseminated.
Another element of the pack is Chapter 5 of Making Space, which, as Mariana said before, is a book written by Matrix members in 1987, and which we have basically illustrated and republished with the pack. In it, Matrix writes about women's relationship to buildings and educates readers on understanding architectural drawings, unpacking and critiquing historical layouts of houses, and pointing out gender inequalities. For our own contribution to the pack, we developed a game called Domestic Consequences, And we took very much inspiration from Certify or Making Space as instruction for the game, help players to basically learn to read conventional architectural drawings. The game is then played using a set of cards with different spaces and objects and activities on them, which are then arranged and layered to provoke basically players to think about, for example, for instance, who might live in a house where a shower is in the hallway, or where there's no corridor, or no hallways at all.
With contributions from After Party, Decosm, Disorderly Architecture, Manual Labours, Part W, and ourselves, Revealing Objects is a collection of essays, posters, activities, and maps. Each object can be read and used to consider architecture and urbanism's role in reinforcing inequalities, gender roles, and colonial legacies, and the effect this has on whether we feel welcome or ignored in a space, at home or out of place.
During the pandemic, the question of unpaid care work and power dynamics at home became especially pertinent and timely. We hope that the current situation will allow a new conversation to begin, where questions around labour and power aren't just addressed on the surface level, but are genuinely interrogated in a process of collective unlearning. We need to let go of unhelpful assumptions and attempt to address the burning issues of social justice and climate emergencies that we are currently presented with. We hope that our practice, as well as the way we practice, can help prove in approaching these challenges. Thank you.
It's weird to finish and not see anyone.
I know.
Yeah.
If people want to put their cameras, we love to see faces.
Yeah.
Only if you feel like it.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I think I should open the floor to questions, if I may. So I think you just have to just turn on your camera, and then I think you have to unmute yourselves, and then you can ask a question.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much for the lecture. It was really interesting and educational. It's like a topic of like great interest to me, and I'm also currently in my third year at AA doing a project about the sort of autoethnographic experience in the public environment as a woman. So my question is, I wanted to ask you whether you also sort of investigate or research the implications, or like the hostility of the public, like the public environment, streets, parks, and so on, and its impacts on different experiences, gendered especially, but like the intersectionalities of the experiences of moving through public space. I would be really interested it's like really broad in general, but I would just be super interested to hear whether you've been thinking about that, or like your opinions on approaches to this autoethnographic view on the experience of public space.
I mean, first, I guess maybe a disclaimer. I think it seems like maybe a lot of our work is very focused on the domestic, which is definitely the case at the moment. But I guess the reason that we've started with domestic space is because we find that a lot of the kind of relationships that are born in domestic space and within kind of the family are things that are then kind of repeated out in the kind of public realm. So whether that's the way that we understand cleaning and reproductive labor in the house, which is incredibly gendered, then of course translates to being something that's kind of incredibly racialized and also kind of class and gender related out in the public realm. yeah, I think I'll let someone else fill in the rest of that.
I guess part of the research was also to, which I've learned from the members of EDIT actually, is that the house is divided by these kind of more private spaces that are mainly like historically where women would be, and the more public spaces are instead the kind of realm of the men, and it needs to be ordered and it's the kind of showcase of the house, and it's kind of like the same thing in a way in public space, because public space was much more used by men because a lot of more men used to go to work. So another part of the research that actually Mariana was developing was about toilets, and how toilets were born for men that were going to work, and because they use much more public space than women. So an amazing drawing that she showed me was, I don't know if you want to talk about this. I'm stealing completely your research in this moment.
It's not stealing, it's sharing. Yes, I think the closest thing we've done to talking about public space was the public toilets research. But I think those two subjects are very connected, because what's kind of considered domestic and at home is the thing that we as a society then don't want to see in public, because we've got this segregation in our minds. So as Alicia was saying, the kind of feminine, domestic and masculine public idea stems from the end of feudalism, and then the Industrial Revolution basically separated reproductive work from productive work, and men were the only ones seen eligible to work outside the home. So that's when that happened. So it's actually sort of much more recent than we might imagine. So with the public toilets, when they started appearing in London, I think it was the end of 18th century. So even though women are already working in factories and they had jobs outside of the home, a public toilet for women was considered something shocking and not socially accepted. And there are also class issues that came into play. So there were ideas about different classes of toilets for middle class ladies who wouldn't want to mix with working class ladies. So those ideas of propriety and class and sexuality and gender. So public toilets for women had to actually be campaigned for by various activists and groups. So it's just really interesting to think about that, and to now maybe draw some parallels with campaigns that transgender people kind of have to carry out to grant them access to something so basic as a public toilet. So I'm sure, this is just one example, but I'm sure this would be the case with many other types of public spaces and public facilities and public infrastructure.
There's a film in the How We Live Now exhibition that Matrix made in the 80s called Paradise Circus, and it looks at how the centre of Birmingham was redesigned in this sort of like the era of the car exploding. And so it was designed by all of these sort of like fairly privileged men who also navigated cities using a car. So like predominantly. So obviously it was kind of like giving over a lot of public space that was originally meant for like pedestrians to prioritize travel by a car. So sort of it's like not only to sort of like pedestrians who the majority of the time were women who didn't own their own cars or have access to the family car as much as the man in the family did. So you sort of it diminishes like space that's safe for pedestrians in general, which obviously has an impact on how women and any sort of like non-male people feel walking through spaces. But also like the scale of cities. There's an amazing description that one of the members of Matrix gives about how you can feel that these sort of much more blank facades that also came out of that era were designed by a man that imagined zooming past it in his car. So that would also be maybe like a really interesting film to watch if you come down. Sorry, plugging the exhibition there. Handy. But yeah, anyway, so I'll let someone else ask the question. But thanks for your question. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Any more questions?
So many cats in the hoce.
Yeah, they're like I've spotted at least 3 or 4, I think.
Yes.
I wonder what they've got to say.
Ask, how do you work together?
Michal, did you ask some? Yeah, sorry. We can hear you, yes.
I would like to ask, how do you work together?
That's a good one. Well, I guess we kind of mentioned a little bit like our aim for working together, which is, and that is the way we work, but like the fact that we want to make sure that there's no hierarchy, there's no voice that like is more important than another, and all decisions are made together, which does come with its advantages and inconvenience, if you would say, but depends what you call an inconvenient. But it is just like time consuming, and it is part of this thing that we're talking about, which is like unlearning kind of ways that we're just all used to working, because we've all worked in traditional practice, it's just trying to kind of move away from that and finding a way that we can all listen together in a really egalitarian way. But in practice, that means a lot of conversations, a lot of like chat, WhatsApp chat, Zoom chat, in-person chat. I don't know, like, how do we work? Anyone else wants to add?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think it's just constantly checking in on each other. And I guess like being friends in a way helps us, because like we kind of work together, but we also really care about each other on a personal level. So I feel like it removes this level of like working with a colleague in a way, and you end up, just talking to your friends about work, which, feels different from, day to day. And I think we do that a lot of talking, actually. I mean, like our WhatsApp group is constantly going off. But I guess like you also start to learn things as well when we have, an email that we all kind of run, and whose turn is it to check and reply, and that can get, blurry, but a lot of trial and error, I'd say.
Yeah, we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
We're also, I think, through this process, we're also all learning what we all enjoy most doing and what we're all better at, what we're good at and what we might leave others to do. But we will share anything that we do all together, and no one will kind of have ownership of a project or a task or something.
But yeah, relinquishing that feeling of ownership and authorship, I think we've all had our moments of like friction around that, because it's so ingrained. Like, I mean, you saw Alice and Mariana do it just then, like about research. It's so hard there's lots of very consciously like collective things happening. We have to be really conscious of it all the time. And like Sage says, it's really helpful that we happen to sort of be friends and meet each other before deciding to form. But as sort of potentially Edit grows, or we collaborate with other people, that approach that we have to each other, like that sort of nurturing as well as like sharing approach, like we would obviously want to expand and work with other people. There's actually one of the contributors to the pack that's in the audience somewhere, so if she did want to say anything about collaborating and working as a collective, someone from Decosm's here, she might be able to say more later. But
I think I just wanted to add quickly that it's also really empowering to work in this way. And I felt that especially coming from a sort of traditional architectural practice. it is hard sometimes, and sometimes it takes more time because you have to talk everything out, but it is also really empowering and fulfilling.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Do you think we answered your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Hi, I have a question.
Hi.
Oops. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It's extremely interesting. I'd like to know how you guys navigate any sexist environments that you might find yourself in, or how you deal with criticism that's not really criticism, just sexism.
I guess for my experience, I've realized after I've joined Edit that a lot of things that happened to me were actually related to sexism. And it's just, I guess I don't really have an answer for you in this moment because, of course, if right now we would be probably confronted with a very sexist episode, then we would be much more able to understand it and call out people for it. But in my personal experience, I thought I was already very much feminist before, but guess not enough.
I guess we've quite successfully removed ourselves from quite a lot of it. By doing this, we've kind of insulated ourselves quite well, which I guess is a coping mechanism, not necessarily the best one.
Yeah, but also just realizing it, I think, is already like Alicia was saying, is like one huge step that like a lot of people probably don't do at the moment. And then realizing it and just like talking about it with others, sharing experience. Like I think being part of Edit helps in this way, but then also being part of like, I don't know, a wider community where like probably most people around you, most women around you have had experience that's in some way or another. So I think, yeah, there's not a perfect solution to it, but I think communicating is definitely one step forward.
I mean, I think actually maybe Sound Advice's book is they've probably worked it out better than we have.
But yeah, I think it's fair to say that we deal with it as a group. So for me, having a group is extremely important, and the fact that we share a lot of experiences is really valuable, and the fact that we can talk to each other about those things is really important.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank very, very much for the lecture. It was really interesting and inspiring. I wanted to talk a bit about because I think that from my experience, I have a feeling that sometimes it's easy to analyze or to identify and to have a kind of a narrative, but the step from the kind of a more the conceptual part or even the research to the practice and the design. And this is something that I really enjoyed from also the way you explained the exhibition, from the ideas and the spaces, etc. So, and I wanted to ask if the moments were from the movies, the spaces, and the manipulation of the drawings. It's also a way to understand the role of the space itself, and this is also helping. So the way also the way to draw, to explain the projects to others, it's also a tool to be more aware about the power of the design itself and how you apply it. And basically, I just wanted to ask about also the process of design after like the research or more kind of the political act of thinking.
Yeah, I think for like the edits, it almost started like as a joke. Some of them started as a joke, and then the more you get into the joke, the more you realize, oh, actually, why like, why do we do these things in this way anyway? So it was like, sometimes it was the other way around. So we knew exactly what we were doing by removing things. Sometimes it was, or like changing things, but sometimes it was kind of a surprise as well to understand that certain objects and certain rituals are not natural at all. And I think that was what was interesting about this experiments, let's say. But yeah, guys, correct me if this is how I think about it.
I mean, they are kind of like little, thought experiments that kind of kept going until you end up making spoons and hoovers and things. But I mean, I hate to keep saying that we don't really know and we're working on it. But the way that we've kind of designed so far is because I guess we realized that we can't just suddenly design a new place to live without kind of going through these really small and potentially insignificant steps. So I guess we're just kind of potentially maybe working our way up to a proper bit of kind of architecture that feels more than a foyer or a cupboard. But yeah, I think this is very much part of maybe a very long process of trying to figure out what kind of sticks and what doesn't.
But also, sorry.
No, go ahead, Soph.
Sure. Just very quickly linked to what Alberta just said. So that sort of idea of doing these experiments ourselves, but then, the activity we did, it was like this at-home resource for kids called like Home Revolution, where we asked other people to, like children, parents, families, whoever, to do these experiments themselves as well, because although we as a group of designers could do those experiments and assume and surmise what might be another way of living just by scaling that up and up to the form of a house. Like that again is sort of what we're trying to go against as a feminist design collective, is to not assert ourselves as the experts, but to work with others. So like as much as Alberta says, we say we don't know, like so much, not just because we're sort of trying to like feel our way through who we are as a design collective, the 6 or 7 of us, but because we don't know, because we shouldn't know, and we don't want to make those same mistakes of sort of like assuming how people should live or creating typologies and things like that. So I think it's important that we sort of like do these experiments with lots of other people who will surprise us. Sorry, Hannah, I interrupted.
No, that's similar to what I was going to say. I was going to say, like, it's we kind of use these tools because it's a useful way of not pretending that we have the solution to anything, because we don't. And I think we often have the conversations about like, what would like the perfect kind of space look like? And we don't have the answer to that yet. Maybe one day, I don't know. But so by using popular culture and performance, like you were mentioning, it's like and tweaking it slightly, or even showing it like in like loops, how it's always the same all the time. We're just trying to make kind of the person looking at it thinking, oh, all right, okay, it is always the same, and it could have a slight difference. And what would that mean? And what would it mean on the wider impact? Like, what would be the wider impact of that small tweak? So it's kind of just showing that there is an alternative to the thing that you're always being shown and always living in, kind of.
I guess potentially a natural next step or something would be kind of to delve deeper into how people live in kind of other cultures, whether it's now or kind of through history, because that's also a really kind of good stark contrast to show people like, this is how we live, this is how someone else lives. Clearly this isn't just happening because, you know, it's natural or whatever.
Which we have started doing in the pack, for example, in Domestic Consequences, which is our activity, which if you all buy, you'll see. Kidding.
So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I don't want to put her on the spot, but is Sana still there? I don't know if she. Sasa, someone has got their hand up.
Sasa? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to Yeah, you are unmuted. You can ask a question.
Okay. Well, my hello from Thessaloniki. I enjoy it very much. I would like to ask you, how did you thought to search the genealogy of doing architecture in a different way? Women, for example, it was not clear to me whether it was this research on the first collective of women's architects was your own project, or you are commissioned to do that. And because I have to congratulate you on the work you've done, and to wish you to be very patient and to be strong and to have courage, a big courage on dealing with these issues. It looks natural. Of course, it's not. It's social and so on. I don't have to explain more, but I would love to tell us more about your collaboration with some members of the first collective.
With Matrix.
You organized this exhibition?
So the exhibition is actually on the work of Matrix Feminist Cooperative.
Yes.
But so the main curators are actually John Asprey and Joss Boyce together.
Okay.
And we were appointed to design the actual infrastructure of the exhibition. And so how we display their work and not exactly where we display. So this is how we worked with John to the design and with Joss to the design with them. So I guess they wanted to appoint also a collective or also someone that deals with the same issues.
Okay.
And they wanted to collaborate with kind of a similar practice as probably Matrix was back then, without, complimenting ourselves too much. Didn't get there yet, but so we it was very much like the ownership of what it's in the exhibition is actually not ours. Is their work. There's going to be, I think, one thing that is going to be ours, but it's all of their amazing archival material, which we had which we were happy to kind of go through with them. I guess it's a bit two different things. So
I think it kind of comes from a point as well where Matrix hadn't really archived their work anyway. So they were looking kind of for this kind of way of doing it. And obviously like an exhibition is a starting point, but now they have like an online platform which didn't exist before. And what else? Like, I think they've just been kind of gathering and, finding all this amazing work that, I think some stuff was found in parents' attics in their homes. So I think, that's one of the starting points, I guess, as well for the exhibition, is this gathering of information of theirs, which hadn't been done before.
And not just theirs, I think like some of the exhibition and I guess the pack a little bit, and the reason it kind of tries to bring in as many people as possible is I think they're also focusing on, almost like, I guess legacy is maybe a strong word, but they were part of a group of people, they were part of a movement at a time who were doing similar things, and then people have been born out of that, and I guess kind of showing that from the book Making Space as, how many other groups are formed and how that kind of turns into a larger movement versus how you might see an exhibition of a kind of single architect and their sketches.
It's sort of like Sage and Alberta are saying as well, designing and working on the exhibition in parallel with Matrix also actually archiving their catalogue of work was really interesting, because they, like Joss and Julia, so Joss Boys and Julia Dwyer wrote this amazing essay with the pack that we made as base. It's called Revealing Work, and it's all about what is a feminist architectural archive, how is an architectural artifact a feminist one, and a lot of it is around the way you treat it and value it. So not only in terms of how they archive it, but how we might display it through the exhibition infrastructure that we've built. So there were lots of sort of very sort of like almost like philosophical conversations that were constantly happening, not just about how we design the exhibition, but how we as a new feminist design collective interact with them and learn from them, and how do we learn from their work. And like Alberto and Sage are saying, these are the groups that have come out of them, and what could come out of the way that we design this exhibition, like what could that also catalyze, so that it's not an exhibition that is like a snapshot in time. It's something that feels very active, with the potential to sort of keep producing more and inspiring more feminist designers, basically. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble.
Thank you very much. I would love to be in the opening of this exhibition, but some other time. Okay, thank you very much. And
thank you very much.
My love to Joss, okay, and my greetings.
We're seeing her tomorrow. I will send it, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cesar.
Thank you for your good wishes for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Anyone? I had to Rusbe, yes, go ahead. Sorry. I have to ask to unmute you. That's the protocol. So it's a very hierarchical protocol of using Zoom.
I think
I will lower your hand now, right?
Yes, thank you very much. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the great presentation and sharing with us your great body of work. I'll try to ask my question in a way that makes sense for myself and for you. It looked to me that what you're working with is kind of information and kind of exposing or revealing layers of inequality that is embedded in culture, like and spaces and practices, etc., which of course is an enablement tool, of course, when you expose them. I guess my question is, to what extent you think manufacturing consents or kind of engineering ideas or imaginations is or can be part of the goal that you want to achieve, basically. Hope it made sense.
Well, that makes sense. I think a lot of it, as it's probably clear, is just kind of having a counterpoint to those images that are very much out there and very powerful and kind of always on our minds and very recognizable. I'm not sure that we'll necessarily reach so far an audience that it'll actually get to that. But I guess for now we're just trying to, I guess we've noticed that there is a problem that you can manufacture kind of different ways of living through only popular culture and through imagery, which is then potentially also going on via policy in the background. So how we can intervene in that is kind of I don't really know where I was going with this now. I don't know again.
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but I will try. I think what we are trying to do at the moment is we're kind of prodding at those questions. And some of these little projects and images are kind of provocations, but we don't necessarily see them as a sort of full response.
Yeah.
So they are maybe we're developing tools. I don't know.
I think it's almost more of tools for research, and then hope that maybe at some point the research is gonna give us projects that are actually able to change things. So it doesn't mean to, maybe they're not projects that will allow us to build things. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it is policy, but again, I guess in our minds this feels quite still detached. So it's still a process that we are trying to kind of work with. So maybe yes, maybe one day, but yeah.
We have another one, another hand, Dhruv. Hi. I think you can just, you're muted still. I think you just have to. Now we can hear you. Yes, great.
Super. The issue is I can't even see myself on the screen, so I don't know if anything's working. Fantastic presentation. Yeah, I really enjoyed all this work and the sort of vast range of research that's going on. And yeah, it's just really great to see all of your stuff coming out. I can see that currently the models, like you've been saying, is touching on this domestic realm quite a bit. But one of the research projects, so it was, what was it called again? Home Revolution. This Open City Accelerate document, or task list almost, sort of sparked this idea, this question of, because there's the perhaps early issue of those who don't identify as, or sorry, I should say those who do identify as non-male, the issue with it starting very early on. And you mentioned things such as all these ingrained issues coming up and trying to relinquish these as much as possible, or at least trying to have a different take on them. I wondered whether you'd thought about not moving, but as an extension of the domestic into education, and how or where it might fit, because essentially we're not too far off of that, I believe. We've probably just been past an education in at degree level, let's say, but even prior to that, secondary school, GCSEs, etc., in the UK at least. So I just wondered whether you'd had any thoughts on that.
Sorry, just to make sure I understand in terms of like how the curriculum is constructed to embed these issues further, not just like the home. You mean education as an institution, and we're looking like
I guess so. Yeah. Whether it is curriculum based or whether you see that it's from a different angle, I'm not too sure either.
Like, please do stop me if I'm not answering quite what you're asking, but 100% see like education and the construction of the curriculum as a massive site for unlearning loads of things that then get really like heavily culturally embedded in the ways that we live, and sort of how those things are perpetuated at large in society. And I think sorry, not to segue back to the home, but it's those places that you really don't interrogate or feel quite safe in or free in. Or I suppose not all of us see school and education as free thinking, but you sort of see it as the beginning of something, in the beginning of you formulating ideas and opinions, maybe depending on what sort of educational institution you're in or at what level. I think people see the home as a space that is like a very free and individual site where you can really like have your own sort of like free choice and things like that. But that, yeah, they really are the foundations of how we operate as a society and the systems that get held up and how we interact with each other. And I think it's, yeah, definitely a really important place. And things, the way that education, not just the curriculum, but like the way those buildings and the sort of staffing and pupil hierarchies within them make a massive difference to how we learn, and then how we sort of then act as citizens in society. Does anyone else want to add to that? I feel like I went off on a bit of a tangent.
That's good. I think that's a really interesting question though. For me personally, I haven't really extended it's still a bit raw to me.
Well, it was kind of it was secondary to the point of the office almost as well, because looking at leadership. And I've recently started teaching this year, and one of the issues that you can clearly see, and I'm not sure if anyone from Brighton is on here, but the point being that there aren't many, there isn't much diversity of age, of gender, that I could see. And so you start to think, well, there must be an extension of this, at least of the work that this great research you're doing. It just made me think of the question, really. That was all. Yeah. But it does answer the question, so thank you.
No, it makes us think. That's good. That's a good question. Yeah. Thinking about it. Thanks.
Yeah, will give us something to think. But yeah, in line what Sophie just said as well, I thought it was interesting how you said, Sophie, that maybe the home and also educational institutions might be seen as, even if not safe spaces, then maybe sort of quite natural spaces. Whereas I'm sure if we started to unpack how educational institutions were conceived and created and developed, we would find many similarities with, how we kind of critique the home being founded on patriarchal and capitalist assumptions. And I think, so I don't know if this is too far-fetched, but for example, I went to London Met for my part too, and I'm ashamed to say I never even realized that Sir John Cass, whose name was, above the door, was involved in slave trade, and I only found out when the university decided to remove his name. So we are part of those institutions, and we don't question them sometimes.
I think it's also like, and I guess like for me, in a way, education does start in the home, because I feel like your parents are your first teachers. And so the way that they've kind of been educated, or how they see the world, naturally filters down. And then I guess you're handed over then to an educational institution who may or may not be teaching you the same or different, or things. And that that handover is actually quite interesting, because like I guess like for me, like being from a Indian background home and then being transferred into a English educational system is like things start to not align. And for me personally, like I couldn't speak English very well because I spoke Gujarati, and then my parents, I guess, were suddenly like, oh, we should probably teach her English a bit better. But it made me think. I think of this because it was like a different form of education, where you had to change the way you thought to fit into the society, I guess, that you're in. So sometimes you kind of don't have a choice. Like you have to fit in within the institution that you're about to go into. But I guess it's all education in one way. It's just then it gets even more interesting. It's like, how do you assess intelligence, and that's a whole different thing. But
yeah, and I think that link as well between the family and the education is also really important, because well, obviously depending on your background, your family, your wealth, you're going to end up in a certain institution or another, and it's probably going to reinforce the habits that you've already kind of started in your family home, but reinforce those depending on where you end up in. And there's like so much inequality, obviously, in where you end up depending on your background. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic that has definitely an impact on your behaviors.
Lovely. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question myself? I mean, thank you so much for the incredible work and presentation and ethos and everything. I mean, I'm really excited to see how the work is evolving also. I have one question about education as well, but I will bring it closer to our discipline. So I'm incredibly interested from the work that you have done around the reorganization of practice, right? So the way, first of all, the project that criticizes the racialized and gender biases within the working environment that are very dominant in our field, maybe profoundly dominant, I would say. And I'm also fascinated by the way you're describing your own working modes and protocols. So my question is, how would you reinvent architectural education? I mean, or, if you could give a list of key things that you would like to do differently, what would they be?
Yeah.
We were all like, we want to do it all different. Okay, Al, you go, sorry.
I have one, and it's just, and I think it applies to everything, which is just more diversity at the top. Like, that's the key one for me. Number one.
Yeah.
Go, so.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Alicia, go ahead.
I don't know. I said go.
Oh, I was going to say number two, probably more collaboration between students, which is why we're doing what we're doing. But I think there's such a disconnect between what we're taught at university, which is all about your individual kind of work and having your individual style and individual topic, and you're all by yourself, and the pressure of having that project that is your own. And then you go into practice and it's completely the opposite, and you have to work with an entire team of people, and often with you often have to comply to a brief from someone else, and with directors that are higher up, etc., etc. So yeah, there's a real disconnect between those two, and I think what we're trying to do anyway, in a way, is kind of find a balance between the two, and actually collaborating in a way that we work collectively, and you can bring your own personality to the work, but you still get to have opinions from others.
Oh God, sorry. Can I add one thing on that just slightly expands on what Hannah just said, and then I'll let you go? I like, so as well as like collaborating with peers within maybe your like the architectural branch of the school, I think collaborating with other disciplines and potential users of your projects like very equally would be really, really important, because like this is how you sort of get to these positions where architects are positioned as experts in designing sort of like built projects, so collaborating with other disciplines and users like very equally, I think would be super important. Almost not having an architectural school, like maybe that's an issue, that we're all just working together. Al, sorry.
Just to basically reiterate everything you said. No, I think for me at least it was kind of a shock to go from uni where I could explore topics that I wanted, but I was completely alone in terms of like, it was very an individual work, and there's the kind of course, all the pressure with it to go, like in a job where basically I could have almost never implemented the things that I wanted, like the research and the things that I've studied at uni that I really want to do, at the same time working with a lot of people. So it was very, like, it was kind of very kind of opposites almost. Like it's the same discipline. However, it was kind of a shock of like a difference between academia and practice. And as Anna said, it's just like with Edit, we are kind of almost trying to be a bit more in uni, but with the perks of being in practice, which is working together. Which is something that I think uni can actually implement way before. But yeah, there is like the obstacle of what is education if you're not passing the course yourself, or it's very tricky. So it's I think it's something that we have done at uni. So we have worked together in doing group work, but it never feels like it's the main purpose of you being in uni, which is
I think that's a particularly serious problem in education in the UK, because for many of us that we have been educated in continental Europe, for example, the majority of studios and the majority of design projects that we have done in the uni were group projects. I mean, often, at least in many countries, that's the case. So I think that this individualized delivery that is going through the earliest stages of education, right, creates at the end, at the top, in the master's levels are, kind of incredibly narcissist, but also incredibly, exploited individual that has to work incredibly long hours, creating something by themselves in isolation, just to go through. And I think that the more you treat this as work and collaborative and collective work, the more closer you get to something which is alternative to that. I think. I mean, also that this is what I understand from your own practice as well. It is work, and when it is work, and it's not an individual. It's not about individual talents, about labor, even, right? I mean, that's for me what liberates it from that. It's like it's anti-narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least that's the way I read it, at least.
And I guess maybe I've got a simpler request, but I'm kind of having a constant battle with the kind of Part 3 system, which maybe is because I'm still on the wrong side of it. But I guess just this like really over professionalism idea of architecture, it's like feels quite restrictive. And even like now, after so many years of education and training, I still don't feel like I can quite take a claim to it, which is kind of insane because, everyone, lives in architecture and understands it in some sort of way. And you shouldn't feel so kind of unable to comment on things without doing so much. I think also, what else was I going to say on that topic? Also, I guess also the timing of Part 3 is quite inconvenient when you come out of masters and you're feeling kind of maybe newly like energetic to try and do something interesting, and then you have to spend a year of your life kind of slogging part-time whilst potentially doing the most boring part of architectural practice. So you're kind of like, when do you do that? Do you do that immediately and get it out of the way, and then kind of losing this like adrenaline rush that you might have at the end of your master's degree? It feels kind of not very useful to the profession.
Can I add one more point as well? Were you going to talk, Marina? Sorry.
I was going to, but...
Go. I've already said mine.
I think that might be an addition. It might be connected to the sort of critique of the individualized studio culture and the sort of narcissistic way of seeing that, the unit and and the unit tutor. I think a side effect of it is that often contextual studies and technical and environmental studies are kind of treated as accessories or add-ons. So I would say don't treat those as mere add-ons to the design studio. They're all the same thing.
I was just gonna say that one more issue. I think is like the pretension of the whole thing in a way that like you very much taught at university that your output. Well, the output and the way you talk about your projects is always like using those big words and like trying to impress with vocabulary and stuff. And I think just moving away from that, and that's kind of what we're trying to do as well. And the output being like more accessible in terms of media and moving away from architectural drawings, which only people with an architecture background might be able to understand, and moving away from big words.
Like a really simple move to test, like maybe quite a few of the things that we've just talked about, is like opening up who sits in on crits. Like those seem like they'll exist for a while until architecture school is sort of like really unraveled, but making the panels that assess your work when it's not the final assessment that RIBA or ARB or whoever do, like those moments of really testing that on a super broad audience that haven't been through formal architectural education, don't necessarily see themselves as designers. I think that would be an amazing way to start testing quite a few of the things that we've brought up, like a really like diverse panel. That could help as a start point.
And normally when we hear from people outside of the architectural profession, they say that they would hate to have a 3-person Hoover because it does create loads of arguments inside the house. And I guess we should probably take that one on board too.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. It's really, really, really great to have you with us this evening. And I think we will have the chance to meet again very, very, very soon. In one way or another, hopefully in the opening at the Barbican. Okay.
Yeah, come down. We'll be by that lakeside terrace every day. Just come say hi.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you everyone for listening for so long as well.
Thanks everyone for coming. Pleasure. See you guys.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.